Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm sharing some holiday cards with texture using the Spectacular Christmas collection from Spellbinders. We have the Spectacular Deer die as well as the Spectacular Bear die, and I'm going to be using the body of the bear along with the head of the deer from the Spectacular Deer die. That way we don't have a card with just a floating deer head. Then I'm also going to be using the Spectacular Santa die, and then we have the Spectacular Holiday Sentiments stamp and die set. I'll be creating several sentiments with this set and then using the coordinating dies to cut them out. I'm going to start by creating those sentiments. I haven't used this stamp set before, so the very first thing I do is use a white eraser over the stamping surface. It just removes any possible manufacturing residue and helps the stamp take ink just a little bit better. And then I use a soft brush to remove any eraser bits. I'm using my Misti stamping tool in order to stamp my sentiments. That way I can stamp them a couple times and make sure I have a nice crisp clean stamping. And then I'm going to heat emboss them with some gold embossing powder, perfect for holiday cards. I'm just using some simple Hammermill cardstock here. It doesn't need to be anything fancy, and you can even just stamp it with colored ink if you wanted. I always love my sentiments to have a little bit of extra texture to them, so I do really like to heat emboss them, but you don't necessarily have to if you don't want to. I'm going to use a little bit of embossing powder tool on my cardstock so that it only sticks, or my embossing powder only sticks to the embossing ink, using that VersaMark ink to ink up my stamps before stamping them. And I repeat this process a couple times just to make sure that I have those full sentiments there. You can look to the side and see the sheen from that stamp in order to make sure that you have that full sentiment on there and you've got a crisp image. Once I have that stamped on there, I'm using some superfine embossing powder. I typically love using superfine embossing powder when it's available, especially for sentiments. You just get so much more detail from it. If you ever have the opportunity, do a sentiment with regular embossing powder and then do it with superfine embossing powder, and you'll be able to see exactly what I mean. Then I'm using my embossing tool to melt that powder. If by chance you have any powder where you don't want it to be, just use a soft brush to brush it off before melting it. Once you've melted it, you can't remove anything after that. After I have all of these sentiments heat embossed, I'm going to use the coordinating die to die cut them. And I do like to tape that die in place just to make sure that when I'm doing my die cutting, it's not going to move on me. There's a lot of sentiments in this set. I'm not stamping and embossing all of them. I have 6 sentiments here. I am doing 3 cards. I'm going to actually put 2 sentiments per card. We'll have 2 sentiments on the front, and the other will have, or the other 2 will have a sentiment on the front and the sentiment on the inside of the card. So once I have all of those dies taped in place, I run it through my Platinum 6 machine to die cut them. And now with all of those sentiments done, I can set those to the side. They'll be ready to grab as I'm creating. I always love to do the sentiments ahead of time, and I always typically do extras. This time I just did the exact amount that I needed. Now to add some texture super easily with these cards, I'm using velvet cardstock for both the deer and the bear. So for this one, I have 2 tones of brown. Now typically the velvet cardstock that I use has adhesive on the back of it, and typically I'll put it on some scrap paper before adhering them together. For this one here, I'm using the adhesive on the back to glue everything together. Just really a personal preference. I typically like it on some scrap cardstock so that it has a little bit of weight to it, but it works this way as well. For the deer's nose, I wanted it to have a nice shiny nose like Rudolph, so I used the mirror cardstock from the Ruby Treasure cardstock pack. I die cut the nose with that Ruby Treasure cardstock. I also die cut it with some black cardstock. I snipped off the little mouth detail on the ruby cardstock and then glued it onto the back black so that we have those 2 details on there. Now I did glue the cheeks on the deer, but then I wanted to put the earpieces behind those ears, so I ended up losing the cheeks off of there. The one thing to note about using velvet cardstock is it does take a little bit longer to dry because that glue absorbs into the velvet and then it starts to dry, so you definitely want to be a little bit more patient with it. So I have to go find the cheeks again. I found one really easily. The other one went off to the side. I put that on off screen and then set those aside to dry. Now for my backgrounds, I want to have a little bit of sparkle, and sometimes you could do it very obvious sparkle. Sometimes it's a little bit more subtle. So this one here is a little bit more subtle. I use some sparkle splatter accents. This comes in a nail polish bottle and it has a brush in it that's just like a nail polish brush. I want to shake it up really, really well to make sure that the mica is well incorporated into the mixture. Then I use that nail polish brush to splatter it onto my card background. And when I'm taking that nail polish brush out of that jar, I do like to rub it on the side of the lip of the jar to make sure that I don't have too much, so that I have some control. Then, because we have the adhesive right on the back of this cardstock here, I'm going to use that to glue it right onto the card. And I oriented my deer to go right in line with the bottom of the card. So I'm working from the bottom of my card up. When I put the head on, I made sure that the adhesive was stuck on the bottom of the head, but not on the top, because I wanted to make sure that I had room to tuck his antlers in behind there. So I added one of the sentiments to the top front of the card. The second one is going to go on the inside of the card. Now, I opted to do all of my sentiments on white cardstock, so they coordinate with my card base. You could do it on a colored cardstock if you wanted it to be a little bit more obvious or a little bit more prominent on your card. Now, the other thing that I'm going to do to add a little bit of texture is I'm going to add some glossy accents to the reindeer's nose. This is just going to add some glossy dome dimension. When you first put it on, it has a little bit of a milky white haze to it, but it dries completely clear. I'm going to let this dry for probably about an hour, so I'll tuck that to the side while I'm working on the next card. But it's a great way to add simple, easy texture onto your die cuts. So for the next card here, I'm using the bear die. So I have it die cut out of some white velvet cardstock, and this is just stuff that I had in my stash that doesn't have that adhesive backing on it. So for this one, I'll just be gluing everything to the back using my Barely Art glue. I love using a liquid glue when I'm assembling die cuts because it gives you that little bit of wiggle room to move and shimmy things in place. I have the pieces for the eyes glued on, as well as the pieces that go behind the ears. Then I have two pieces cut for the nose. The upper layer is that velvet cardstock. The under layer is just some blush cardstock. I have some blush cardstock die cut for the cheeks. Now, another way that I'm adding some texture to this is I'm using some of the Aquamarine treasured cardstock in both the pearl and the glitter finish for the hat and the scarf. This is just going to give it some nice glittery texture, as well as having that pearl finish on the rest of it. You could use regular cardstock if you want, but again, I always love finding different ways to add extra textures, and using different types of cardstock, or like the velvet cardstock, like regular cardstock, like the glitter cardstock, is a great way to add interesting details to your die cuts. So as I'm gluing these things together, I am just kind of moving my way around my pieces. Now, when I take all of my pieces out, I lay them on my desk kind of in order of how they're assembled, so that I can see all of my pieces. I can easily figure out which piece needs to go next. I don't have to hunt through a pile of die cuts to find the piece that I'm looking for. It makes it really, really easy to assemble everything. I know for new people, beginners, having die cuts with a lot of pieces can be a little bit intimidating, but by having them all laid out like that, it takes some of that intimidation away, because you can see everything that you need, and you can see which piece needs to go next. For the background for this card, I'm using some Coastline metallic ink. This is from Lisa Horton Crafts, and I just put it on my acrylic block, misted it with some water just to make it a little bit more liquid, and I'm using that for the splatter for the background here. I wanted the splatter to coordinate with the scarf and the hat from the bear. I wanted it to have just a little bit of color. I'm also using that sparkle splatter accents amongst it, so we have those two little mediums in that background adding that splatter. It's just adding a little bit of interest to the white card background. Often I'll do my backgrounds and then I'll matte them in a different color and put them on my cards, and I wanted to do something just a little bit different than what I normally do for this card. Once again, I'm starting at the bottom of the card. I lined up the bear body with the bottom of the card, and I'm working my way up. Now I have a white card here with a white bear. You could easily change the color of the bear if you want, or you could change the color of the card if you wanted it to have more contrast. I think there's enough color with the hat and the scarf that it doesn't really need it. And because I have that sparkle or that splatter on that background, it also incorporates that as well. So for this card, this is the one that I'm going to add both of the sentiments to the front of the card. I'm adding them just a little offset from each other to add, again, a little bit of interest. And again, if you wanted them to show up a little bit more, you could easily heat emboss them on colored cardstock. I typically like my my sentiments to kind of coordinate with my card base. It just depends on the mood I'm in. I added a little bit of stickles to the holly berries on the hat, and then a little bit of that glossy accents to the nose. Now, because that blush cardstock from the nose is underneath the fur cardstock, when I added the glossy accents, I went a little bit away from the edges of that fur cardstock. Velvet cardstock. The velvet cardstock, if that glossy accents touches it, it will just absorb the glossy accents and you'll get a really weird finish. So I like to do it just shy of it so that it doesn't actually touch it, to make sure that it finishes off nicely. For the Santa, I used glitter cardstock from the Ruby Treasured cardstock pack for his suit. You could also use velvet cardstock for this as well, but I wanted to do one card with something just a little bit different from that velvet cardstock, but I think the velvet would look fantastic. Now I have the trim die cut out of just white cardstock, and I'm going to be adding some stickles to it once I'm done to add a little bit of glittery shimmer. Now the belt is just die cut out of regular black cardstock, but I do think, and I didn't think about this until after the fact, that using onyx mirror cardstock would be fabulous. It would give some shine to the belt and also add another texture. We have the bag die cut out of some pomegranate cardstock, and then I have the face die cut out of Bellini cardstock, as well as cheeks and nose die cut out of blush cardstock. So as I'm putting these pieces together, you can see that I have the pieces laid out like I was talking about before. Some of those smaller pieces, I'll use my handy tool set for just picking up the small pieces and adding them to, say, the face, like the cheeks and stuff like that. When you die cut these pieces, often there's a little indent line showing you where the piece on top is supposed to go. So it takes the guesswork out of it and makes it really easy for those small, tiny pieces to just put glue where they're supposed to go and then use that wax tip tool in order to lift that die cut up and just place it exactly where it's meant to go. So some of the pieces I'll do that for. Some of the pieces I don't do that for. The larger pieces, I'll just flip them over and put the glue on the back, but the smaller pieces, it's really easy to just add the glue to the top and then pick up the different pieces with that wax tip tool. That way your fingers aren't in the way either. So here Santa's head is done. I'll put that off to the side. Now we have the bell. That one is just die cut out of some pearl gold cardstock so that we have another different finish there. Now the glasses, I only die cut the glasses out of white cardstock because it was in the same die as the fur trim from the hat, from the jacket. So I didn't want to die cut all of that out of the gold pearl cardstock, but the easy solution is taking that white die cut and using the Lisa Horton gold pad to ink that cardstock gold. So if you don't have the right color cardstock, often ink will work well if you have that particular color. I used that same gold ink that was left on that acrylic block for splattering my background here, and I also splattered it with some raven splatter accents. This has some black to it, so it's going to tie in with the black accents of Santa's outfit. It also has a gold shimmer to it, so it's going to tie in with those gold accents. So it'll tie in with the bell, it'll tie in with the glasses, as well as our sentiments. Just like the other cards, I'm starting at the bottom, putting his outfit down first, lining up with the bottom of the card. Then I'm putting Santa's face on there. And then lastly, I'll add the sentiments. And again, I'll do one sentiment on the outside, one sentiment on the inside for this one. Lastly here, we're going to add Santa's glasses. There is an overlay detail if you wanted to have his Santa or his glasses in two different colors. I preferred it to be just plain though, but you can add that detail if you wanted that on it. So here is the final card, and I'm going to add a little bit of glossy accents around the rims of those glasses just to give them some glossy dome dimension. I also put it on the rim of the bell that Santa is holding. And then, like I said before, I'm putting some stickles on the fur trim from his hat, the little pom-pom thing at the end, as well as the fur trim from his coat. You could use white glitter paper if you wanted, but I chose to do the white paper with the glossy accents just because it has a little bit of a different finish from glitter paper itself, and I wanted that different texture because we have that glitter paper for Santa's outfit there. So I'm going to set that aside to dry as well, and once it is, All of that glossy accents has turned completely clear and glossy and has a great finish to it. Now, I didn't do it for this card, but you could use, say, circles of acetate underneath those glasses if you wanted to have that shiny reflectiveness between them. I didn't think it was totally necessary. I thought we had enough texture in these ones, but I wanted to share that tip as well. Final list of the supplies that I've used in the description box below. Next, we have our little polar bear card with that white velvet cardstock, and then the Aquamarine pearl and glitter cardstock for the hat and the toque. And then finally our Rudolph die cut here with that velvet adhesive cardstock. I love the final look of his nose with that mirror cardstock with the glossy accents on it. It looks fantastic and adds a lot of fun dome dimension. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.